Dear students, today we will discuss Mendelism, that is Mendel's laws of inheritance. Gregor Johann Mendel is called as father of genetics as he performed large number of experiments on garden pea plants and postulated various laws. Principle of inheritance formulated by Mendel are called as Mendelism. The first principle is principle of unit characters. It states each organism has large number of characters like height, skin color, and each character behaves as a unit which is controlled by a factor. Second principle is principles of paired factors. Each character is represented in an organism by two unit factors now called as alleles, which occupy same gene locus on two homologous chromosomes. In case of homozygous, both alleles are same like capital T, and in case of heterozygous, they may be different like capital T and small t. Here we can see. Now we come to third. Third is law of dominance. According to Mendel's law of dominance, when two organisms with a pair of contrasting traits are crossed, then one allele of a pair expresses itself and other allele of the pair which controls a character remain unexpressed. The allele which expresses itself is called dominant allele, while the allele which fails to express itself in a hybrid condition is called recessive allele. Let us take an example. When a homozygous tall pea plant was crossed with a homozygous dwarf pea plant, in F1 generation only tall pea plant with genotype capital T small t were produced, thereby showing that the allele capital T for tallness is dominant over unexpressed allele small t for dwarfness. See, mathematically here, a tall pea plant can be represented by capital T, while the dwarf pea plant can be represented by small t. These are parents, they were crossed. The gamete produced were capital T and small t. When capital T and small t fused together in F1 generation, the organism produced were having phenotype as tall, however their genotype was capital T and small t. These are called as F1 generations. Now we come to next law of Mendel, that is called law of segregation. It states that two alleles controlling each character maintain identity in the organism, but during formation of gametes or spores by meiosis, they move apart due to separation of homologous chromosomes which bear them, so that each gamete receives only one allele of each character on a random basis. Since gamete possesses one allele of each character, they are always paired. Hence, law of segregation is also called as law of purity of gametes. This law does not have any exception. Let us take an example that we have discussed earlier. When a tall pea plant was crossed with a dwarf pea plant, in F1 generation all plants produced were tall, although these tall pea plants were heterozygous or hybrid. To get this law of segregation, what Mendel did is he took these heterozygous or hybrid tall pea plant and selfed them. He selfed them. On selfing, the gamete produced were capital T, small t, capital T and small t. Now we draw a checkerboard or Punnett square and we find that these are male gamete, capital T and small t. These are female gametes, capital T and small t. If these two T, that is one from ovule and another from pollen grain, come in contact, the plant produces tall. Then if these two come together, it is tall. If these two come together, it is tall. And if these two come together, it is dwarf. It is really surprising that none of the parent of these organisms were dwarf, but 1/4 of the progeny, that is F2 generation, was dwarf. Means dwarfness was expressed in this generation. If we observe the phenotypic ratio of F2 generation, we find that tall and dwarf were produced in 3:1. While on observing the genotypic ratio, we find that the genotypic ratio is in 1:2:1, where capital T is 1, capital T small t is 2, and small t is 1. This checkerboard clearly shows that in the absence of capital T, when both small t come together, they get a chance to express, and the phenotype of progeny is dwarf. Out of these 3:1, tall and dwarf were produced in F1 generation. In case of a monohybrid cross between tall pea plant and dwarf pea plant, when F1 hybrid tall pea plants were selfed in F2 generation, both tall and dwarf plant were produced phenotypically 3:1 and genotypically 1:2:1. Next law is, or next principle is principle of independent assortment. This law states that alleles of different character are located in different pairs of homologous chromosomes which are independent of one another in their segregation during gamete formation and in coming together into the offspring. Both processes are occurring randomly. For example, a cross is made between pure round and yellow seeded pea plant with genotype RRYY with wrinkled green seeded pea plant with genotype r, small y. Since yellow color is dominant over green and round seed shape is dominant over wrinkled, so in F1 generation all plant produced were having round seeds and yellow seed color. However, their genotype was RRYY, means they were heterozygous or they were hybrid. The parents were homozygous, the gametes produced and then F1 generation produced was heterozygous, but the phenotype was round and yellow. When these F1 hybrids were selfed, the gamete produced were like this. 4 types of gametes were produced by both the parents. These were the gametes. Then in F2 generation, a different result was produced than that of expectations. We can explain this with the help of checkerboard. In F2 generation, 4 types of plant were produced that were round and yellow, round and green, wrinkled and yellow, wrinkled and green in a 9:3:1 ratio. Although it was expected that in F2 generation the phenotype must be in 3:1, but it was a different 4 type of phenotype were produced in 9:3:1. This shows that 2 type of recombinant, wrinkled and yellow, 2 type of recombinant, see here, wrinkled and yellow and round and green were produced which were not present in their parents, and which is possible only if alleles of 2 different characters are free to recombine during their fusion and are independent of each other. See, if we see the checkerboard, these are male gametes and these are female gametes. We see that at these nine places, capital R and capital Y both are present and hence they are round and yellow. At one place both capital R and capital Y absent and hence it is wrinkled and green. At 3 places capital R is present but capital Y is absent. It means these places are forming phenotype as round but green color of seed. These are 3 places, and remaining 3 places capital R is absent but capital Y is present, thereby proving that wrinkled and yellow are the new combinations produced in F2 generation. This is also called as principle or law of independent assortment, also called as dihybrid cross, because here we are taking into account 2 phenotypic characters, that is seed shape and seed color. This is of principle of independent assortment.